My name is Mike Ryan. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I'm currently living at Moreau Seminary across the lake. I'm a postulant with the Congregation of Holy Cross, which is the first year of their seminary program. I studied civil engineering here at Notre Dame. I graduated in 2012. For the past 5 years, I've worked for a construction company in Chicago and Detroit as an engineer. Like I said, I went here to Notre Dame, graduated in 2012. My major was civil engineering, and then I had a concentration in structural design and analysis. I lived in O'Neill Family Hall on West Quad. The sense of community and the camaraderie of that community was really life-giving for me. From an early age, I've always been tinkering, trying to figure out how things work. It's funny, as you know, my mom will show me pictures as a kid. There's always parts of stuff around, and my brothers and sisters will joke about that as well. So from an early age, just this idea of the application of science has always been interesting to me. And then when I was in high school, the building we were in was undergoing this massive renovation. So it was really interesting to see the thought behind that and the process of that whole renovation and the steps to it kind of fostered my decision to become an engineer. A lot of that was also the high school experience, just seeing the construction, seeing the different steps of it, and wanting to be part of that. Part of it's also back to a kid, like the tinkering and the Legos, never really grew out of that. But in high school particularly, seeing the effect on the built environment that these people had was something that kind of interested me. So I hired on with Clark Construction out of undergrad. They're a big general contractor based in Bethesda, Maryland. They have work across all different market sectors all over the country, from bridges to mines to skyscrapers to tunnels. And I hired on with them. I was in Detroit for 1.5 years working on a government renovation project. It was a really slow-paced project, which was great for me to learn from 2 great mentors, all aspects of the business, and to get involved in that. After 18 months, I was moved to Chicago, and I was given this incredible opportunity to work on a 55-story office tower. Really challenging project. It's built over 8 active train lines. So really fascinating project, but I started in the office for that project, writing contracts and kind of doing the planning. And then as we started construction, we ran into some problems and they needed somebody to cover the night shift, so I volunteered. And it was a good opportunity for me to take a step towards what I thought I wanted to do with my career, which was more people-oriented and kind of managing the workforce rather than office and money management kind of stuff. So I worked on that project for 37 months from the very first day to the very last day. It's an incredible task and process to see. It was really cool. And then after that, I worked on a 25-story apartment building, had 100 units. I managed the apartment build-out as a superintendent, which was interesting, but eventually I quit my job and I applied to Moreau. My faith journey and vocation story is rooted in my family. So I'm from a big family in Columbus, Ohio. My parents put all of us through Catholic education. Faith and religion were always an important part of our lives and something that was stressed. So throughout school, the idea of the priesthood, I always knew about it, but it wasn't something that I actively thought about. And my vocation story kind of kicks off, unfortunately, through illness in high school. I got real sick, and I started to feel this call to follow Christ more directly through encountering him in suffering. And it was really, really challenging, but also as I took steps and developed prayer life and started to try to follow Christ more directly, it was kind of peaceful too, which was a strange thing amidst all this turmoil. So I graduated high school, I went to Notre Dame, still tried to live my faith actively, but I was studying engineering and I really liked it. And unfortunately, I got sick again, a different unrelated illness, after my freshman year of college. And that was kind of another, shaking of like encountering Christ and hearing this call more clearly. So I really started to dig into this and started to talk to vocation directors and kind of discern what this means in my life. But I was studying engineering. I was putting a ton of time into engineering, and I enjoyed the thought of being an engineer. School was, challenging, but I enjoyed the thought of like working as an engineer and that kind of mindset. So as I went through school, discerning God's call on my life, studying as an engineer, it came to senior year, and I wasn't panicked. I had, felt God's encounter with me really peacefully through 2 experiences of illness. So I was deciding to enter the seminary or to pursue this career that I've, a little bit dreamt about. But I always felt that if I entered the seminary, I would just continually ask, what if I had worked as an engineer? What if I didn't do this? What if, So to a certain point, I almost wanted to prove to myself that I could work as an engineer and make that decision. So I hired on with this company. I set some pretty vague goals of what I thought I wanted to do and what I thought I would be happy doing, which was, working with the guys on a project and managing that. And I got there eventually. So after 4.5 years, I get to this point. I'm happy with what I've done. I've kind of established myself. I started to dive into this calling again. And it was a little bit challenging, but I still felt called. So I quit my job and joined the seminary. So it's exactly that. It's a transition. 4 years of engineering education, 5 years of working for a construction company. Probably not your typical seminarian, but it's been really interesting to have that perspective. So, the 6 months I've been at Moreau, at first I kind of beat myself up that I couldn't, think theologically, or I wasn't coming up with these great insights. But I've just kind of learned that I think differently. I'm a little bit more hands-on, so it's been an interesting transition, but something I've come to enjoy and appreciate about my background and just the way I see things. So faith in the workplace, I worked on a construction site. So it wasn't a typical work environment, not that there is a typical work environment, but it wasn't, faith wasn't something that we talked about or something that we were geared towards most of the time. So as I reflected on this question, I kind of thought, as I entered my career, what were my ideals of how I would, live and work? And I kept on coming back to this quote that Dr. Casey had in our freshman engineering 101 class. And she says something like, you shouldn't decide a career for the money you're going to make or the fame that you might have. You want to do something that's going to put you in a situation to like affect people and impact lives and change the world. So her idea was that through our education and then through the opportunities presented to us, we could impact people day to day. And that was kind of my the trajectory I wanted to take towards work. And then you get to work and everybody's stressed. Everybody thinks their needs are more important than everyone else's. You're on a timeline. It's just crazy. So that's really easy to lose track of, very easy. And after a couple months of work, I was talking to one of my brothers, and this is kind of cheesy, but he just gave me like a small rosary that even to this day I just have in my pocket. And as I'm like going through the day or frustrated with something, just kind of a reminder of my faith, how I act and behave, and how I should act and behave. So in 2014, my younger sister Kathleen graduated from Notre Dame, and I went to her commencement here. At this point, I'm working on the night shift for close to 6 months, kind of frustrated, not exactly the high point of my life, but this frustration and seeming lack of meaning in work was really bothering me. And the commencement speaker that year was Reverend Ray Hammond. I think he's a Christian pastor in Boston. And he is an excellent speaker. It was really, really interesting. But he kind of went on this, not tirade, but this thing during his speech about how he says we need to focus more on our career, less on our career and more on our calling. So he says, a teacher doesn't teach subjects, she teaches students. A physician doesn't heal people, he heals diseases. And goes on about this. And as business people, we're not called to strict management, but to servant leadership. And then he says, architects, engineers are called to restore, reshape, and even heal God's creation. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, all the aspects of that. And as I think about how I lived my faith, and hopefully people at work would see this, and some of them would comment on it from time to time, but I wasn't dealing with carpenters and masons. I was dealing with somebody's dad and somebody's wife and somebody's brother or son. So this human aspect of it. And how I live my faith at work, I try to treat people right. I tried to be fair, honest. My word is really all I had to give to people. So if I committed to something, I was going to live up to that commitment. It was a difficult thing to reflect on for this question because, you want to say you were evangelizing or something, but unfortunately that wasn't the case for me. But this human aspect of who we work with and how we relate to people definitely was how I approached faith in the workplace. The nature of our business was you're on a project, and that's your life till that project is finished or you're moved to another one. If I had to sum up my years with the company I was with, it would be this office tower we built. It's kind of an iconic structure in Chicago now. The bottom of it's shaped like an inverted triangle. As I was on the project, always said it's like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'll never be on such a cool, high-profile project. And I left the company, so I guess that's kind of true. Won't be on one again. But we, through the company, we did service work. We'd renovate people's houses on the weekends and stuff like that, which was another way to kind of engage my faith and that aspect of my life. Yes. Like I said earlier, at first I kind of got frustrated the way I would see things. And I talk a lot about this with my classmates in the seminary. Just by the very fact that your eyes and my eyes are not the same, we see things differently. So we have this different viewpoint, and then I have 4 years of engineering education and 5 years of construction experience. That's my viewpoint to the world. To not be able to see things that my classmates did, but they'll joke with me that things that I think of are just kind of comical and just an interesting perspective. I was reminded of this a couple weeks ago. A couple friends and I are trying to plan a trip to France to see where the founder of the Congregation of Holy Cross is buried. So they're looking at pictures on a website, and they pick up this monastery, I think in Spain, they wanted to visit while we're in Europe. And they're looking at it saying, oh, this is beautiful, I'd really like to go there. And I look at it, I'm like, how the heck did they build that building on the side of a mountain? So it affects me. And then as it affects me towards faith, I enjoy theory and it's good to learn, but my approach to faith is how do people live this? How do we take these clean words off of a page and apply them to this messy, non-black and white world that we live in? What does that look like? And how do I teach people this abstract concept? How do I teach the people I was working with something like that? So. I think particularly at Notre Dame we're inclined to, it's not just career, but this idea of a calling and to impact the world and have meaningful work. What helped me was it began with me. I didn't need to engineer some life-saving medicine to make a difference in the world. It began with me, how I treated the people around me, how I acted, how I responded. I had bad days, people at work will tell you, and I didn't always act 100% appropriately or faithfully, but the realization that it begins with you, and you might not be changing the world in a grand scale, but even just one person can make a difference every day. So as I thought about religious life, I kind of paralyzed myself a little bit about it, a little bit by it, because I was working in engineering, thinking about religious life, but I had a foot in each world, which for a long time, which kind of paralyzed me. So two things I'd recommend, focus on one. If you're not going to apply to religious life right now, like live in the world that you're in and don't pull back from it because you might do this later. That was pretty, as I've reflected on it, that's what I was caught in, and I wish I wouldn't have done that. But the other thing is, don't be afraid of the shift from like engineering and science and practical, at least in civil engineering, very hands-on things, and to theology. It's going to be a transition, but the church needs different, viewpoints to kind of bring this all together. And I think engineers bring a really interesting human element to all of that as well. I'm really excited about this website that you guys are doing. I think it's an important tool, and it's something I definitely could have used. The world I worked in, faith didn't fit very neatly into it. So hearing different people in a setting like this would have been really helpful as I was starting my career and living into this. But advice I'd give to people is just, be yourself. Don't compromise your values or your virtues. Give it your best. Be faithful, and the rest will kind of take care of itself.